I know you guys are probably getting a little tired of me basically ranting. Um, in my defense, I would like to argue that I'm not ranting per se most of the time, because I do try to back up my arguments with, points. But I understand that several people tend to think of the way I go at it as ranting, and I'm with that, and I apologize, because this is season 2 of Voyager. My other option is to just not discuss the episode. I could do that, but I'd rather not. I mean, that kind of defeats the point, right? And my hair is all over the place today. My goodness. There we go. This is non sequitur. No, non sequitur belongs to that wonderful category of Voyager episodes which has wonderful potential and doesn't do anything with it. I mentioned this in the 37s as well, and several season 1 episodes. Non sequitur is the episode in which Harry Kim wakes up one morning and finds himself back in San Francisco with his fiancee, Libby, who we've heard about several times before, and everything's fine. How strange. And he wanders around acting like an idiot. What? I actually have very little to say about this episode in proper because it's a bad episode. There is one thing I want to say right off the bat here. I do feel for Garrett Long. He's the guy who plays Harry Kim. He had been instructed to play a very wooden character, and it isn't until much later in the series that they finally decided to let him act like a person. This would have been a perfect episode to have Harry Kim act like Harry Kim. There have been the occasions in the past where he's had a few scenes like this or something like that, and I usually tend to mention these, but this whole episode he is just playing the wooden man. I will act according to parameters. Error, error. That's Harry. That's my synopsis of this episode in a nutshell. Really, what I just did. My reason for bringing this up is that I feel this is one of the real reasons why this episode is such a crime. It's not bad like the next one will be. It's not bad like several of the upcoming ones will be. It's not worst like, say, Threshold is. It is dull, embarrassing, and awkward. Really. And the irony is if you define early Harry Kim, those three words pop to mind basically immediately. This episode is early Harry Kim and everything they did wrong with the character in a nutshell. His interactions with his fiancée are pathetic, have no real emotion or interest in them. They meander as far as dialogue goes. There's no actual direction there for someone he supposedly loves, is the true love of his life. There's nothing there. There's no spark. There's no interest. There's no chemistry whatsoever. To be fair to the episode, that might be to the fact of the guest star problem, which I'll talk about later. But there's nothing there. The plot itself is actually, I'm okay with the premise of the plot. I really am. My problem with the way they implement the plot is the fact that the alien guys, whose name I can't even think of right now, show up and basically drop the solution in his lap. That's not good storytelling. I'm sorry, it really isn't. If someone just walks on and says, "Here's the answer," if you're going to do something like that, you have to do something with it. In other words, they have to have an ulterior motive, or maybe they're just testing you, or maybe it doesn't actually work, or maybe it does work but it accomplishes something else in the interim. You do something if you have someone show up with the answer. You don't just have someone show up with the answer so you can get to the end of the episode. I feel like the writers were like, "Oh shoot, how do we fix this? Why don't we have the aliens who've been watching him say, 'We can fix this if you want'?" And then they just kind of left it at that, didn't decide to do anything with it. Now, the guest star thing. This episode, and let me be honest, in my changes section, this will actually be more so, okay? So I understand the problem here. I'm sorry, itchy nose. One of the realities of television is getting guest stars is always going to be a bit of a problem. If you're fortunate, you get a guest star who's awesome, or guest stars who are awesome. But when you have an episode where one of the main characters is on the show and basically every other character you interact with in the entire episode is a guest star, at that point, your odds of getting good guest stars for all of them just shrink and shrink and shrink with each additional actor. There's Libby, Harry Kim's fiance. There's his partner, whose name I can't even think of. There's Admiral Lardass. I can't think of his name either, obviously. And, of course, the guy who plays the alien. Now, of these four, and I'm of course not counting minor characters, but of these four, the only one that has any real acting capacity whatsoever is the guy who plays the alien. And even he is just kind of the way he does it really well. I'll actually give him credit. He does kind of get this casual, "Hey, what's going on?" And, just this really, almost extroverted kind of, "Hey, semi-charismatic thing going on." That was actually all right. But all the other three were just bland, boring, and awkward and embarrassing. I keep coming back to those words. Good example of this. Harry Kim. Well, okay. Let me actually praise this episode on one point. To be fair, again, the teaser was perfect. I wouldn't change the teaser like at all. Harry Kim wakes up. He's in his bed at home. The cut to credits right there. Boom. That is all you need to do. Anybody, you can only do this sort of thing further into a series, but at this point we are in season 2. Anybody watching this show probably has been watching this show, so they understand with that simple like 28-second bit everything that's being said on the screen. Harry Kim and what we know about him is back home on Earth, and there with Libby. I think Libby was in the shot. I actually don't remember right now. I would have her in the shot, but those 3 pieces of information we disseminate immediately, and we understand without having to be told anything whatsoever why this is a big deal. Actually, the several reasons why this is a big deal, and why that urge to know why this is happening, what has come to pass. Is this the past? Is this a flashback? Is someone messing with him? Did he actually get home somehow? What's going on? Perfect hook, right? So I wouldn't change that at all. His scene almost immediately after where he gets his uniform on and starts talking with Libby as if she's an alien and he's trying to interrogate her, or she's trying to interrogate him or whatever. I don't even have words for that scene. I really don't. I'm sorry. I don't have words on the ones I've already shared. I don't know how to discuss that scene. It's just you put a guest star who isn't a very good actress, along with an actor who is being told not to act, and give them lines that basically read as though they were done from a high school play. That's basically what this is. And I'm saying none of this in hyperbole. I'm not trying to be insulting. This is me trying to be literal, okay? The dialogue was poor. It has no flow to it. It has no natural cadence to it. The only thing that came across properly in the dialogue was her reaction to him at the end, where she just basically says, "Go to work." That was the only thing that actually worked in that whole scene as far as dialogue goes. And when you add the problem of the 2 actors, one of which is not very good and one of which has been told not to be very good, you get the problem here. And I've basically just summarized the episode for you. There are some very logical plot holes in this episode, 2 of which I'm only going to bring up 2. The first is one that's just irritating. I've said before that there's a line between, the whole phrase, the phasers are firing out of the photon torpedo tube. That's just a glitch. That's just a goof. That's not the kind of thing I get big on. Really, that is a continuity error in the very technically sense of the word, and I don't give a damn, to be honest with you. If it's a continuity error about a major plot point, about a major character point, about a major story or setting point, about something that is integral even just to this episode, that bothers me. And it only scales up from there. For example, the episode Real Life is an episode where continuity should have mattered for the rest of the show. I'll talk about that when I get to it, but general point made, right? And that bothers me because that was a huge, traumatic, horrifying event that never mattered ever again. That is a continuity error. That's like the most extreme continuity error in all of Voyager, actually. But this episode contains like the middle ground, which is still bad. This is still a problem. This is like halfway up the scale. Within this episode, Harry goes to this meeting in order to discuss how they're building this new shuttle and they're all this new engine stuff and blah blah blah. Technobabble. I mentioned this is a problem because at the end of the episode they get in that shuttle, which is already made, which already has the blah 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 already working, and use it to get away from the ships in order to make their escape. Can you see the problem with that fact? That bugs me, because ultimately that kind of problem can only come from one of 2 things: laziness or not paying attention. Now let's be honest. When you're initially writing something down, you're going to make mistakes like that. I do. Everyone does. The whole point, though, is that after you write it down, that's like step 1. Well, actually, it's like step 2. The framework is step 1. Writing it down is step 2, right? Then you go back, personally, the person who wrote it, go back and proof it and look through it. Usually you'd catch it there. But even if you don't, this is a television show. There are other people who are also going to go back, proof it, and add lines of dialogue here and there as is fit, as is necessary. There is a reason the writers just write tech, for example. But that's not the only example of this. This is true in television in general. So, a absolute bare minimum of 3 people have looked over this script and said, "Yep, we're good with it." Like I said, they're either not paying attention or they're just lazy. No. The other plot hole is the biggest one, and the one I will address within my changes. Harry Kim is the character arguably most inclined to try and get home. In the episode Eye of the Needle, which was one of the few good episodes that featured Harry at all, or featured Harry properly, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. In that episode, Harry Kim was, yes, I've found something that might be able to get possibly a message home. That mere fact, the idea of getting a letter, basically, for all intents and purposes home, was such a big deal to him. And he got that across very well. In this episode, he is home. This is not an alternate reality. This is not a parallel dimension. This is not some fantasy world, stuck within his mind screw kind of a thing. No, no, no. He's home. Now, I'm not arguing that he should have stayed that way, but he acts the entire time like he is so dedicated to get back. And he never says why. And he never shows any point that he's ever conflicted about this whatsoever. That is flat-out character assassination on the Neelix level of scale, in my opinion, for how badly they've been screwing Neelix over in the most recent episodes, and will again in the upcoming episode Parturition, which is just... I'll get to that. That is full-on character assassination, taking everything, like 3 of the major elements of Harry Kim as a character, as we know him so far, and basically just flinging them out the window and saying he has to get back to Voyager. Why? Give him a reason. Give him a motivation. Show him conflicted about this. Show him happy to be home. Show the fact that this child, no offense, but Harry Kim is effectively fresh out of the academy, is in his dream position. Let's not mistake that many times Voyager tries to do this, to show Harry Kim as the royal smart person, right? The guy who's really good with his head, really good with technology and science. He is designing new ship systems at Starfleet headquarters while living with his fiancée, who at this point is probably his wife, because it's been a year. I'm sorry, but that is basically perfection for this character. When you are offered paradise, you do not just abstractly try to get away from it. You have some motivation for doing so, you have some reason for doing so, and at the very least, even if you ignore both of those things and you feel like, well, I have to go back because that's the way things were supposed to be, and don't actually have any fleshing out of that, the absolute bare minimum requirement here is that you show that it is a decision that is hard to make. I got to be completely honest. If I woke up and found myself in something where everything that went wrong in my life several years ago, actually I guess about a decade ago at this point, if all of that had never happened, and my whole life had involved a completely different way, and I was still with other people. I'm sorry, I don't want to get into details. You don't need to know my personal life. If things were different, and it was great, I've got to be honest, I would probably be at least partially motivated to try and revert things, because as much as this life has sucked for the last decade or so, there has been good in it. There have been people I have helped in it. There have been people who I have become very close to, friends, family, loved ones. I would lose all of that. They would lose all of that. I'm not trying to be egotistical here, but you get the point, right? But at the same time, I have to be completely honest with you as a human being. That would be a hard choice to make. If I was truly in my ideal life, which I assure you I am not right now, I would be hard-pressed to make that decision. I probably would. I would like to think I would. I don't know if I would, because, this is pure hypothetical fiction. But that, if you'll forgive me for being blunt, is a very human reaction. And that is another reason why I call Harry Kim, especially in this episode, wooden. Because he is not human in this episode. He is a log toy. Less animated than Pinocchio. And that is a disservice to us, a disservice to the show, a disservice to the series, as in Star Trek as a whole, and a disservice to Harry Kim and to Garrett Wang. The show disgusts me because of its utter lack of feeling to its potential. There is one other thing I'd like to comment on with regard to this episode. I mentioned that it is almost entirely guest stars. That's because Tom Paris is in it. Now, this could be argued in several directions, but I have to comment. This is a benefit. This is me trying to bring back the hate and be a little bit fair, right? The chemistry between Garrett Wang and I suddenly can't think of his name. The guy who plays Tom Paris is actually quite good. I've said before that I've never felt a gay vibe between those two, and I stand by that. Even having rewatched the series, I just don't get any of that from that. What I do see is two people who hit it off like that, right at the bat. First time they met, they were just like, boom. You understand what I mean here? These are two people's, both their character, and this is beautiful, their characters and the actors both had such automatic and immediate chemistry. In every scene that the two are in, the two actually tend to work surprisingly well. Even Harry Kim, who I've just spent a decent amount of time complaining about, and of course Tom Paris, who I of course rather like in general. It's incredible, and I mention that because in this episode, one of the real highlights of the episode is the scenes with Tom and Kim. Cliched writing aside, like the scene where Tom is literally 3 feet away, right in the street that Kim happened to run to when he was fleeing from the Starfleet personnel. Even ignoring that, every scene that those two are in is actually quite good, and I liked Tom's line about "You're the only person who ever had any reason to believe in me or care about me." I liked that. And the two have such immediate and apparent friendship showing, even though in this particular reality they've never met. And the guy playing Paris, I'm sorry, I can't think of his name, is doing a good job of portraying that, of being, someone who is acting like, who the heck are you, random guy I've never met before? And yet, even while portraying that character, someone who is effectively not Tom Paris for all intents and purposes, there is still such an obvious camaraderie and friendship that just is right there. It's a match set, and it works. It's great. And I will give that credit to that. It is ironic because in my changes section, that's going to be removed entirely. Let's get to the Arshangai edition, shall we? Voyager Arshangai edition, non sequitur. I probably would change a few of these titles, to be honest with you. I don't think some of them fit. After all, Elogium comes to mind. I would keep the teaser exactly as is. I already mentioned that, with the possible exception of changing the camera angle to make it clear that Libby was sleeping in the bed next to him. I don't even remember if that was in it. I'm sorry. The very first thing I would do is have Harry Kim. Well, let me actually take a step back, if I may. You'll notice that the last several episodes, even in my edition, have had nothing to do with the overall canon and continuity. That is by design. One of the things I would want to do, and am doing in my edition here, is to have character focus, character pieces, from projections to Elogium, and I think I'm missing another one in there, and this one, non sequitur. The next episode, I'm going to bring the continuity back into it, but I wanted to have that break right towards the beginning to really focus on the characters and how they've changed and how they've grown and where they're at now. Okay, so this is the Harry Kim episode for all intents and purposes. Nothing to do with the Terranok Alliance, nothing to do with the Conclave, nothing to do with that overall story arc, nothing to do with the Baori, nothing, right? Harry Kim wakes up, finds out he's here, looks around, checks some things, checks the stardate. Stardate's exactly what it should be. Everything is actually what it should be, except for the fact that he's here. And Harry Kim is smart, okay? So the very first thing he does is he's sitting there and he tilts his head for a second and he looks up Star Trek Voyager, or the starship Voyager, USS Voyager, and he says, yeah, it's listed as lost, lost in space at this point. And no idea where it's actually at. And he checks the crew manifest, and Tom Paris was actually on the ship, by the way. And he just kind of frowns at it for a moment and says, "Huh," but he doesn't notice himself. He was never actually assigned to the ship. That's the change, right? So he immediately starts thinking about this, and he decides and Libby comes up, and I would want there to be some kind of chemistry between the two. I know that's harder to do than it sounds, but I want the two to actually demonstrate the fact that they are lovers who have been together for years, and at this point are, in fact, married, not simply fiancés. And have her come over to him, and she says, "I know that look, something's bothering you." And he looks at her, and without question or hesitation, immediately tells her the truth. Not in this bumbling, stupid manner, not, "Are you an alien?" Just, "I shouldn't be here." "What do you mean?" "No, I'm sorry, I don't mean you. I mean, I think I've entered an alternate timeline." And she'll look at him like, "Oh, come on, Harry." And it's like, "No, seriously, listen to me." And he would tell her, and she would believe him because these two have that connection, right? And so she'd say, "Well, what are you going to do?" And he says, "Well, I don't know exactly what caused this. I'm going to go into Starfleet Command. I've got a meeting today anyways, apparently, according to my schedule here. Not sure what that's about, but, I'm going to go to them and I'm going to be honest. I'm going to tell them the truth." And so then we have the scene where he goes to the admirals. It can be rather brief. We've already heard his explanation, so we don't need to hear it a second time. We could just have him meeting the admirals or coming back from the meeting of the admirals. No need for repetition here. And he comes back to his house and he looks around, and I would love the sense of wonder in his face because he is home. And he's not just in home. He's not just home, Alpha Quadrant. He is home, home. He is back on Earth. He is back in San Francisco at Starfleet headquarters, living with his wife. He is as home as it gets. You understand? And I would want him to get that across in his face and just be like, wow, And in my version, the aliens don't exist. I'll get to that in just a moment, but they are not part of this whatsoever. And as I mentioned, neither's Tom. The only showing of Tom Paris will be right at the end in the coda. I'll get to that later. So he gets home and he goes to Libby and he's just grinning because of how happy he is. And he's like, this is incredible. And he just grabs her and hugs her really tight. And she's like, oh, well, what's this about? I'm just so happy to see you. And she's like, well, I mean, you saw me yesterday. And he's like, no, I didn't. Don't you understand? She's like, all right, right. So how long's it been? How long has it been for you? And he's like, over a year. I haven't seen you in over a year. I didn't even know if you still remembered me or cared about me or were willing to wait for me because we couldn't communicate. I was trying so hard. I found a wormhole. And he would just kind of start rambling and blabbing and blabbing. And she'd be like, no, 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 it's okay. I'm here now. And have them just show him being happy like that. That's important for what's going to come up soon. Next scene, relatively speaking, would be Starfleet getting back a hold of him and saying, "You're absolutely right. We did some studies, we did some tests, we figured it out. There's been this blip, there's some chronotons or whatever. Technobabble, technobabble. I don't like. I speak against technobabble many times, but in this case, I feel it could be used as a proper tool. That is to say, here's some made-up science to show the fact that we understand that you're from a different timeline or from a altered timeline, or rather, this is the altered timeline. We've already started running numbers to how to put it back. Now, this is happening. This meeting is happening at his house while Libby is there, and so Libby actually looks concerned, doesn't say anything, and Kim says, "Put it back." And they're like, "Yeah, I mean, we're in an altered timeline. We need to, temporal prime directive and all that. We need to shift this back." And Kim says, "Well, actually, I wouldn't bring up the temporal prime directive because that adds a layer I don't think the episode needs. But we're willing to shift this back. I assume that's what you want, what we need to do." And Kim says, "Let me think on that." And it's like, "Okay, well, we'll be in contact. We still got to run some tests. Blah, blah, blah." They leave. And Kim looks to Libby, and Libby is looking at him with tears in her eyes because she thinks he's going to go again. And she would have this line, something along the lines of, "I don't want to be without you for over a year, and I don't know how much longer. You've been gone for a year, and you still haven't been able to contact me. I don't want to go through that. I don't want you to go through that." And Kim's like, I know, but I don't know if that's right. I don't know if their timeline is right. I don't know if our timeline is right. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do it. And as this time, and as they discuss this back and forth, the dilemma I want here, I've basically already highlighted this, is that he wants to stay, and he feels ashamed and guilty about that. He isn't sure if he's right. This isn't really a matter of right or wrong. The point here is that he genuinely wants to stay. He wants to keep in this timeline as much as he, is friends with Tom and with all the other people involved in there. His interest is in staying here. Okay. Now, to really bring this into focus, the episode would actually cover a fairly large period of time. We would skip forward several months. At a time, actually. Next scene would be, several months in the future. Well, okay, next scene would be him saying, I'm going to go ahead and stay. I've decided this timeline is no better or worse than the other one, and we probably shouldn't meddle with it if we don't. He can give whatever excuse he wants. He's not going to tell them the truth, because, again, he feels very guilty about the truth. But, we're going to keep it as is, and okay. Now, skip forward several months, and he's happy and with Libby, and they're married, and she's pregnant or something like that. Actually, not pregnant yet, sorry. She's happy, he's happy, she's pursuing this artist career or whatever. It's something interesting to her, maybe geophysics, I don't know. And he's really working on his engines, and he's really being able to pull out his element. He's actually a lieutenant junior grade now, within a few months, which is quite impressive in real life terms. And he's been he's loving his job, everything about it's fantastic. He's working on this new engine, and he is just on cloud nine because he's basically left the problem behind him. We skip forward again probably about a whole year at this point. Now she's pregnant, and he's actually going to be a father soon, and the baby isn't born yet. That's kind of important. And he sits down one time, and he's got a message from, it doesn't matter who, to be honest with you. And it says it was a ticker, to him from something old in his file from, a couple of years ago, and he's like, okay. And he finds out that the Voyager crew had managed to send back, they had sent a final message, basically, which had just reached them through some method or another. It almost doesn't matter what. You can both basically insert your Technobabble thing here if you'd like. Certainly Project Pathfinder might have been able to accomplish something like that, even though it hadn't existed yet in the actual Star Trek. In this version of Star Trek, I would actually like to have Project Pathfinder hinted at early on, something they were working on. Lord knows Admiral Paris would be really pushing for that, for example. So that makes sense to me. And they managed to get a few bits and pieces. They find out that Voyager was destroyed. Don't know a lot of circumstances, they just know that Voyager was destroyed. And this hits Kim like a ton of bricks. I would want him to be, he gets home and he's happy, and he reads the message and he starts scrolling down, and we have the view of his face, not the camera, and his whole face just dissolves until he's actually looking with an almost look of horror And Libby comes in and she's, and she sees his expression. He's just, and she's like, what's wrong? And he would say it. Voyager has been destroyed. Now, she would come over to him, and he would, and the two of them would have this discussion. And I would love for this discussion to be, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do lines because I would really have to sit down and write and rewrite and rewrite a few dozen times to really perfect it. But that's the kind of effort I would put into just the whole episode in general, but especially in this scene, because this scene is the pinnacle right here. Harry Kim has what he wants, what he has always wanted, and what he will want for the rest of his life, right now. And he is the one who is going to argue that, I mean, what do I know? If I go back, would anything change? Would Voyager even be destroyed? Would anything change whatsoever? I mean, we have a child on the way. That child wouldn't even exist if this timeline wasn't here. And you, Libby, I mean, we've had the last 2 years of life and love and wonder. 3 years, I'm sorry, 3 years of life, love, and wonder. How could I possibly give that up? No, there's nothing. And it would be Libby who convinces him to go back. Libby who convinces him to go ahead and go to Starfleet and say, let's do it. Let's revert it. And she would argue that she believes in Harry Kim, even though the other her will never know. She knows that she would have waited. She would have remained faithful. She would have known that if it really meant something to the two of them, that it wouldn't matter how much time passed in between. And we can have that child later. We can have that life later. But you have friends and family on that ship, Harry. I know you do. I've heard you talk about them. Go back to them. I'll be here. And Harry finally, acquiesces and goes ahead and they put him in a shuttle or whatever, and he does this thing, and he finds himself back, on the shuttle he was back at on Voyager, and he comes back to the ship, and Tom's there to greet him. He says, "Hey, I really wanted to just do this thing and that thing and blah blah blah." And Harry looks at him. And I would want Garrett Wang to do. I think he could. I've seen him act before. Again, I think he could pull this off. To look older. He isn't physically older. He's been reverted back to the 2 year point, right? But he looks at Tom, and there's just this age and weariness. But as he looks at Tom, it just kind of goes away, and he starts to smile again. And I would want him to literally grab Tom into a hug, and Tom be like, "Whoa, whoa, what's wrong? What's wrong?" And Harry says, "Come on, I'll tell you about it on the way." And Tom's like, okay, And that would be the last shot of the episode. That's how I would do Non Sequitur. I know there's several alternate versions out there about this episode, and many of them have very similar themes to mine. And I'm not going to apologize for that, because one of the reasons for that is because it's that potential thing. The potential for the episode was there to begin with. Most of the people I've talked to in person as well regarding this episode all had the same generalized thought. Make this a real dilemma. Make this about Harry Kim. The same kind of things I'm tossing out there. So I'm not going to apologize for any aping, because it's not intentional, if you understand my meaning. I'm not trying to mimic anyone else. I would just want to really explore Harry Kim as a character and actually show that connection, and I would want that Libby plot to come back around sometime in the future. So be on the eye for that. A little bit shorter than usual. That's kind of strange considering how much thought I put into the changes section for this one. Next episode. What is the next? Oh, next episode, Twisted. I'll talk to you guys soon.